I'm glad there was a happy ending to that one. I got a bit worried at one stage there. Next Saturday, we offer you 2 excursions into the world of devil worship, no less, with our horror double bill. First, at 5 to 11, The Seventh Victim, starring Kim Hunter. And then, at 5 past 12, there's dark goings-on, very dark goings-on indeed, deep in the heart of Texas, with Race with the Devil, that stars Peter Fonda. 2 to look forward to next Saturday evening. Quick look at the clock now. It's, 20, or just after 1:30, isn't it?
On to Roger Corman talks to Derek Malcolm at the National Film Theatre.
Roger Corman is the man who resurrected the B-movie in the 1950s. For 15 years, he directed some 50 films and produced 30 more, very cheaply, and with then untried directors like Peter Bogdanovich, Martin Scorsese, and Francis Coppola. In the 1960s, Roger Corman began to attract critical acclaim in Europe with a series of horror films starring Vincent Price. And in 1967, his controversial movie, The Wild Angels, opened the Venice Film Festival. In 1970, he formed his own company, New World Pictures, and since then has made many successful youth-orientated films, such as Death Race 2000, Jackson County Jail, and most recently, Battle Beyond the Stars. Well, Roger, I've just had this list of your credits, and it reads so long that I'm completely taken aback. I don't know where to start or to finish. Tell me, how did you actually start in this peculiar business?
Well, I had several starts. I had a couple of false starts. I came out of Stanford University ready to really hit Hollywood, and the best job I could get was as a messenger at 20th Century Fox. And I worked there for a while and worked my way up to being a story analyst, which is a reader in the story department. Left there, came to Europe, studied briefly at Oxford, went back and worked as a stagehand in a television station, became a literary agent, wrote a script, sold the script myself, went along as associate producer, became a producer, then a director, and just kind of moved from there.
And when you started direction, did you realize that that was going to be what you were going to do, or did you think, first of all, I'm going to set up my own company and direct and produce, or did that come gradually and naturally?
No, the setting up of the company was a much later concept. The original concept simply was to make films, and so it was a transition from writer to producer-director.
And at that point in time, did you feel you were going to make a certain type of film for a certain type of market, or did that too all come later?
I was primarily a short-term planning. I said, all right, I'm going to make this type of film, and maybe I'll make one more in a similar way. But there was no thought that 20 years from now I'll still be making a certain kind of film.
Well, I think probably we're going to concentrate on that period of your career, but I would like to ask you briefly, first of all, how you actually started making your very well-known horror movies, whether there was a conscious attempt to make horror movies as such differently from the Hammer movies, which were very famous at that point in time.
I wanted to make The Fall of the House of Usher, and I got American International to back me on that film. And what I wanted to do there was to remain as true as I could to Poe's concept. And I think if there was any difference between what I did and what Hammer was doing at that time, I was very much interested in Poe's concept of the unconscious. I think he was working in a literary way in the 19th century, much as Freud was going to be doing in a medical or scientific way a little later, which was almost the invention or the creation of the concept of the unconscious. So I was trying to make the film on 2 levels. One, on the surface level of the conscious mind, and 2, on the subtextual level of the unconscious mind.
Wait! 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 I command you to wait!
Prospero, Prospero. You command me to wait? Very well. I wait.
Condotti? Rimini? Who are you beneath your mask?
Is my costume such a disguise that you don't recognize me?
Your voice, it's familiar. Dottore Pernelli, that's who you are. Pernelli, you dog, thinking to... You're not Pernelli.
No. The doctor dances in the white room. But I passed close by him. Truly, Prospero, you don't know me.
So you've come?
Yes, Prospero.
On your knees!
Prospero!
On your knees to the Prince of Darkness.
Was this the first time critics began to take note of you as a director?
They had been giving me pretty good reviews all along. As a matter of fact, I have no complaint with critics. From the beginning, I generally got good reviews.
What made you come to England to make several of your horror films?
It was the effort to make a slightly bigger film. The Poe pictures in the United States were shot on an average budget of, about $350,000 on 15-day schedules, 3 weeks. And American International had an arrangement, I believe, with Anglo Amalgamated at that time, who had been distributing the films in England, and they had done well. And so Jim Nicholson of AIP and I think Nat Cohn of Anglo decided that they could make a bigger one, and they said if I would come to England, I could have a 5-week schedule. Well, I'd never had a 5-week schedule in my life, and I said I'll be delighted to have this extra time.
When you were making your horror movies, you were also making other movies too. Was that for a specific market?
No, it was a slightly different market than what the majors were catering to at the time. It was primarily a youthful market. I was aware of the fact that surveys had indicated very definitely that the bulk of the film-going audience was young. And it seemed to me, and until very recently, I believe the majors seemed either to be ignoring this information or not be aware of it at all. And so I felt I will appeal to a youthful audience. I felt that the bulk of the market was of above average educational level. So I was trying to do two things, and this has been through most of my career, which was to make a film to fit a reasonably well-educated, youthful audience, and at the same time to make a film that would be satisfying to me. Now, that's a very difficult thing to do, to make a film that is both commercially successful and personally satisfying, and I've succeeded to varying degrees and failed to varying degrees in that attempt.
I hear that you made your films mostly in the autumn and winter, and then sent them around with the sunny weather, and then put your art movies, which you bought for distribution, at the drive-ins in the winter.
Yes, that's what I've done more recently. Since I've had New World Pictures, that has been roughly our policy, to have art films in the winter and our more commercially oriented films in the spring and summer.
When you bought Cries and Whispers, for instance, Bergman's Cries and Whispers, did you actually put that into drive-ins as well? I believe you did, which must have been a horrific experience.
Well, we did. It had never been done before, but I felt that the Bergman films, as with most art films, had not really been well distributed in the United States. And what I wanted to do was to distribute them as efficiently as I could and to play them for as wide an audience as I could. So what I evolved, which was not that original a pattern, but it was a little bit different from what had gone before, was the pattern of opening the film in New York with a certain kind of advertising and publicity, fanning out to the major cities, and then with a heavy emphasis on the university towns. And then we went into commercial theaters, and I thought, why not put it in drive-ins as well? And people said, you can't put a Bergman film in a drive-in. Well, clearly we could. And we got reasonably decent grosses. We didn't break any drive-in records, but I have a letter from Ingmar Bergman thanking me for bringing a new audience to his films, which is what we did.
How did you manage to get tied up with AIP in the first place? That was the company which distributed your films for so long.
All right, the first film I had made, I had given to a very small distribution company. And the second film, which was a picture called The Fast and the Furious, which was a road racing action film, I had offers from Columbia and from, I've forgotten, one other company, Republic, which is not in existence at the moment. And I could see one of the traps for the independent producer at that time. You put your money or your backer's money in a motion picture, you put it in release, you waited a year or so for the money to come back, and then you made another film. And it seemed clear to me if this was the way I was going to be working, I'd be making one film every 2 years or something like that. Well, Jim Nicholson was a sales manager for a small company called Real Art, and he had seen my film, and he wanted me to give him this film as the first film for his new company, American International. And I said, you know, I have offers from essentially major studios, but I will make this deal with you. If you will give me money in front for this film, and if you will guarantee me funding for 2 more, I will put my film with you to start your company. And we made that arrangement, and that enabled me to start making films one after another without what most producers have to go through, which was that terrible period of raising money on each individual film.
AIP you were with for some time, but then came Gas and the Red Baron, and you had a quarrel with them. What exactly happened with Gas?
I finished the picture, and it was somewhat controversial. For instance, one of the key characters was God. And we played him for comedy. I thought God was very funny. And everybody at AIP agreed with me and said, this is very good. And I went off to Europe to make a film, and then found that after I had gone to Europe, they had taken God out of the film. God ended up on the cutting room floor. Now, I wasn't that angry because the film had some flaws, and I can't really say that AIP destroyed a masterpiece. But what little good was in the film, they took out. So I determined at that time to start my own company, so for better or for worse, they can blame me.
And when you started your own company, did you feel that it was going to be a similar operation to AIP, appealing to a similar market, or had the market changed by 1970 quite dramatically from the 60s?
The market had changed a little bit in early 1970 from the 60s. It was still, I thought, a market that was somewhat radicalized. And one of my problems with AIP was that as they had grown more successful, they had grown more conservative, thus cutting God out of films. I was a little more radical in my thinking, and I felt that I could make low-budget films that would appeal to the audience and would represent a little bit more of my own personal viewpoints.
I suppose it was really about that time, 1970 or so, that the word exploitation picture seemed to be coined. I don't really know what exploitation picture means, because it seems to me that the average Hollywood product from the big studios is every bit as much exploitation material as anything you've ever done. Some of your critics say, for instance, that you may have at times exploited your young directors, in other words, given them very little money to make a product and exploited their talents. Other people will say that you were in fact exploiting your audiences to some degree. How do you regard this phrase as completely meaningless, or how would you defend yourself from those charges anyway?
Okay, well, I might say that to a certain extent there was an exploitation of me. I would turn it around a little bit. I was taking the money that I was making as a director and giving it back to other directors to launch their first films. My finances were limited, so therefore the budgets of the films were limited. As to the exploitation of the audience, I don't think so. I think if anything we gave the audience, or at least I would like to believe, that we gave the audiences more than they expected. Our films were advertised as straight commercial films, as entertaining films with action, with some violence, possibly with some sex, with humor. Most of those things we did have. At the same time, I would like to believe that we were giving them more, that we were giving them films of some meaning. There was a political orientation, there were certain social themes, there were psychological viewpoints in the pictures. And through almost all of my films, I've attempted to make these films on those two levels.
How did these films actually start? Did they start from an idea by a young director, or an idea by yourself then hiring the young director?
All right, there is no one way because each film is unique unto itself. But in general, the film would start with an idea of mine. I would rough out a very loose storyline in maybe 3, 4, 5 pages, something like that. I would then work with a writer or a writer-director to develop it. Most of my work on those films as producer would be in pre-production. Once I was satisfied that the script was right and reflected what I wanted to have, and that the director and I were in agreement as to the themes of the film, the style of the film, and so forth, I would pretty much leave the director alone during the shooting.
I think you said that by about 1970, or perhaps a little bit later, sex was out and car crashes were in. Is that true?
Well, I think sex is still with us, as a matter of fact, so I wouldn't say it's out totally, but we did change. You can't keep making the same film over and over. One, you get bored with it yourself, and the audience taste is changing. So in the mid-70s, we did start wrecking a lot of cars, that's true.
You yourself really didn't make any more films after The Red Baron. That was a great shock to us here because we couldn't understand why you'd suddenly stopped directing.
It was just that I had made too many films. I had directed, I don't even remember, 60 or more films in a fairly brief period of time, and I had just gone from picture to picture to picture. So I felt that I would simply stop for a little while, and then the running of New World Pictures became so horrendous that it was a full-time operation.
Do you regret that? Would you like to make more films now?
Yes, I do intend to go back to directing, probably not in '81, but I think my company is getting a little bit more self-sufficient, and probably in '82 I will start again.
I can't help remembering that 5 years ago when I was talking to you, you also said exactly that, and you haven't made another film.
Well, try me again. It's in 5 more years.
Okay. Your own company now has been extremely successful. But you've moved, in a way, towards the industry, just in the same way as the industry has moved towards you. Do you find yourself mixed up with the industry a great deal more now?
Yes, we're a little bit closer to the mainstream. We've moved a little bit, but the mainstream has moved a little bit, too. For instance, Vincent Canby in the New York Times reviewing, I believe it was Jaws, said, "What are these films but big-budget Roger Corman films?" And when you think about it, they're better than the little films I was making, but there are certain similarities. The first film I ever made was Monster from the Ocean Floor, and the storyline of Jaws is vaguely similar. I was doing the science fiction films, and now we have the big science fiction films. I was doing low-budget gangster films. They're big gangster films. No, I can't take any specific credit. I don't think anybody was trying to steal my ideas. I think it was that the major studios were slowly becoming aware that these genre films, which is one way to refer to them, were extremely popular with the audiences. And so if somebody was making one of these films, let us say for a couple of $100,000, why not make one for a couple of $1 million and make a really big one? So as a result, the major studios and I were beginning to make similar films.
A new departure recently was St. Jack, which perhaps could have been thought of as a little bit of an art movie, certainly not the usual Roger Corman movie, and I understand that didn't do particularly well at the box office.
St. Jack got very nice reviews, but was not as commercial, and so that trend stopped, at least for a little while, but I may get back to it. Matter of fact, I would like to get back to it because I do believe it is a valid way to work.
Hey, honey, what are you drinking?
Good evening, gentlemen. Hot chocolate.
Hot chocolate, sonny.
Welcome to Singapore.
Thank you.
Do you like your stay in Singapore?
Oh, they love it, don't you, Phil?
Yeah, yes, fascinating.
You're English?
Yes, I am.
Oh, I'm very interested in Englishmen.
Oh, no, really? I beg your pardon. You're Chinese.
Yes, I'm Chinese.
Were you born here in Singapore?
Yeah, born in Singapore, live in Singapore, die in Singapore.
Bridget, honey, a friend of mine from the U.S. thinks you're very beautiful.
Oh, really? American?
Yes.
I'm very interested in American men.
Isn't it getting kind of late? Let the lady have a hot chocolate.
It's all right, Jack. Your friend is impatient. That's very flattering.
We have an angel here.
Why don't you get the taxi?
Hello, how are you doing tonight?
Okay, honey, I'll do that.
Oh, no, thank you.
Sonny, forget the beer. What do I owe you? $20? No beer, $20. What if you gave us the beer? What would it cost? All right. I'll see you soon.
Jack, I never see you anymore.
Helene.
Women here are all so attractive.
They're all guys.
It's odd to me that you should now be making an attempt to move toward the majors market, because as a critic I should have thought that over the last year I don't think I've ever seen so many bad American movies from major companies.
Well, I'm moving towards their market, not towards their films. So there's a differentiation there.
Do you agree with me that the average product from Hollywood has actually, in the last 2 or 3 years, gone down considerably in quality?
I think it has, and I think it's gone down for a variety of reasons. First is the giant rise in the cost of production. You're seeing films now costing $10, $20, $30, $40 million. Those same films will cost another $10 million to advertise. When you have that much money in a film, there's a tendency to play it safe, to appeal to the broadest popular audience. And when that happens, I think the film loses individuality. It loses whatever artistic sense of uniqueness it may have. And I think you get to the point where you're turning out a homogeneous product. It's like turning out automobiles, and you suddenly have, not suddenly, we've had it for some time, you have a very money-oriented industry making films rather than an artist making a film.
You also came to England with a view to starting up your company here. What happened then? Because nothing apparently happened.
You stated it. You just said nothing happened. That's what happened. I'd started my own distribution company in the United States, and it did very well. So I expanded and formed a Canadian company and had a Canadian distribution company, and that did very well. And the little bit of corporate-type planning that I indulge in, which is not much, indicated that the next step was England. So I started a distribution company in England, and it lost money the first year, and I closed it down.
Might you, in fact, come back to England in the future?
Yes, I almost undoubtedly will come back to England, but in a production capacity, not in a distribution capacity. That's my thought at the moment, which could change.
It's certainly a very difficult time for the cinema for a number of different reasons just now. Do you think there's a lot of hope for the future? What do you feel about filmmaking now? Is it a much more difficult operation or not from when you started?
I think it is a much more difficult operation commercially. For the actual making of the films, I don't think it's any more difficult. I think it's more difficult to sell them. For young writers, actors, directors, producers to break in, I think it's easier. I think the major studios today are looking for young filmmakers, whereas when I started, they didn't want to hear about you at all.
How many of your films throughout your career have actually been a success, got their money back? Practically all, I believe, isn't it?
Yes, there have been a couple of failures, but most of them have done well.
How do you reckon that you've actually done this? This seems to be the most extraordinary miracle that's ever been done in Hollywood.
There was a great deal of planning. If you're going to make a film for $100,000 or less, and I've made a lot of films for much less than $100,000, you are limited in the amount of time you have on the floor shooting. You are limited in many things by the money. But the one thing you're not limited in is the thought that goes into the film and the amount of pre-production planning and work that goes into it. So this is just a function of, one, how good you are, and then two, how hard you are willing to work to prepare the film. And I think that the original planning probably was the most important part of it.
Have you made any bad mistakes with the directors? I know you've made some magnificent choices for people like Martin Scorsese and people like that to make films for you. Have you actually ever given a film to an incompetent?
I've never given a film to an incompetent, I will say this. I have occasionally guessed wrong. Once or twice, some of the young directors I've worked with have not turned out to be as good as I hoped they would be, but luckily, so far, not one of them has ever been a total bomb on the set.
Have you often wished that you could make a second film with that director, who's then gone on into the industry? Or don't you mind about just the first one and then letting him go and then taking someone else?
Well, my thoughts on that are changing. At the beginning, when I was just functioning as a director who was working with other young directors, or sometimes the new director would be older than I was. For instance, when Irv Kershner did his first film for me, and he was my protege, he was my elder. It was a friendly basis, and I was paying him a small amount of money to make a film, and he knew that because he knew it was all the money I had. So it was a fair trade. I was gambling with him to make the film, and he was taking a low budget and a low fee to make the film, and I did not ask him to do a second film because I felt that would be taking advantage of him, that it was fair just to make the one film. However, recently, as New World has become a continuing company, and as our budgets have grown, I haven't yet done it, but I'm getting ready to start saying to the new directors, okay, I will take a chance on you on one film, but I want an option on the second one.
Well, we'll be opening this up to the audience after one more question I'd like to ask you. Compared to 1970, what sort of an audience is it now you're actually making films for? Has that audience changed over the last 10 years?
It's changed in a number of ways. It is still in the theaters a youth-oriented audience, but the average age, again, studying the statistics given, seems to be a couple of years older than it was then. But a more important thing is that we are looking at a more fragmented audience. When I started New World in 1970, my theory was very straight. I felt that every film should be planned in such a way that it would get its money back out of domestic theatrical exhibition, and any additional monies we got from television or from foreign would be additional profit. I no longer think that way. Today, I think of domestic theatrical as simply one slice of the big pie. There's domestic theatrical, there's foreign theatrical, there's free television, domestic and foreign, there's pay television, there's Army, Navy exhibition, there are airlines. Films are being shown in many more ways, and that's a more significant change in regard to the audience than the age or the educational level.
Do you think that English films actually, or French films or German films, do better in the States if in fact they are very French or very German or very English than if they appeal to some kind of mythical international market?
In our distribution of foreign films in the United States, we have very seldom, as a matter of fact, we only tried once, and our competitors have tried many times, and we've monitored their actions to take the films from different countries that were conceived of as great international productions or co-productions, and we've seen that they have not succeeded. Where we've taken the individual films, generally the art films, the films of some of the directors we worked with are Bergman, Fellini, Truffaut, Kurosawa, Alan Rene, a number of others, and you can see the continuation of this pattern at the moment, in that we're putting money with Lindsay Anderson here. We have money in a picture I just saw the rough cut of day before yesterday in Paris, which is an English-French co-production. Jim Ivory and Ismail Merchant are doing quartet with Alan Bates and Maggie Smith and Isabella Gianni. And that's that type of film. And we're also with Werner Herzog, the German director. In each case, these are individual films that we feel will have a better potential audience in the United States than the more obvious type of international production.
Right, let's open it up to the audience. I'm sure lots of people want to ask questions. Here's one straight away.
What do you think about the situation of films like The Trip and The Wild Angels that haven't been shown legally in this country?
I never quite understood why those films weren't shown in this country, because there was no particular violence or sex in them. I think they were really censored more for political reasons than anything else. The Trip dealt with drugs, but didn't deal with it in a particularly heavy way. You've seen films much more drug-oriented than The Trip, and you've seen films with much more violence than The Wild Angels. I think there was a viewpoint behind the films which they were censoring more than the films themselves.
May I ask a question? I've just seen Jim Furman, the censor, in the audience, and I wonder whether he'd like to comment, just on a point of information. What is the situation with The Trip and Wild Angels in this country now? Could you tell us, Jim?
Yes, Wild Angels, the film was passed about 8 years ago, and we were asked recently to reinstate the cuts. And in fact, in the light of the resurgence of racism in this country in Nazi gear, we refused. And we felt that the fact the film apparently glamorizes a racist group who beat up spics in a garage and get up to that kind of thing, this was the wrong moment to reinstate those cuts. It's as simple as that.
All right, and let me say that you were not the head of the board at that time, so I've never met you before, so we have no quarrel. The only thing I would say is that there was no attempt on my part to glamorize Nazis or a fascist viewpoint. My personal political viewpoints are on the exact opposite end of the spectrum. To state that the Hells Angels wear Nazi gear, I think, is not to state that it is wonderful to wear Nazi gear, because I do not think the Hells Angels represent all that is best in our society.
What about The Trip? Is there any objection now to that?
Well, The Trip really comes up against the whole problem with LSD in this country, and as you know, there was tremendous resurgence of LSD until Operation Julie, and then it died out. And The Trip makes LSD trips very, very glamorous. But just at the point at which it might show the consequences of a bad trip, it takes the soft way out. And I think the end of the film does glamorize it. And we thought, on the whole, we would rather it was shown uncut to club audiences of film buffs who could appreciate it as a film than shown widely in cinemas where people might be indoctrinated to want to try it. Because there is now a resurgence of LSD taking in a small way around the country.
Do you agree with what Censor says about that film?
Not necessarily. I agree with the statement that the Trip is honestly shown, or at least we attempted to show it honestly. One of the problems, of course, was that I had taken LSD before I made the film, and so did Peter Fonda, so had Jack Nicholson, so had Dennis Hopper, so had everybody who had worked on the film. And the real problem was that, to me, my trip was phenomenally good. I mean, it was just great. And I felt a moral obligation not to... I felt a moral obligation not to make the trip as good as mine was, because I felt that I really will be in a position of pushing drugs with this film. So I talked to people who had bad trips and brought in elements of theirs into the film in order to try to balance the scales.
Have you ever had any censorship troubles with any of your other films, apart from these two in this country?
I don't think so. Maybe in a gangster film or something there might have been a few frames taken out, but I think those are the only two that I can recall. I think in one of the horror films, a little moment was taken out, but those are the only two that ever had any real problems.
Do you think that horror films have changed now over the last few years, that they've become different?
Yes.
I understand you're going to make a Saturday the 14th. I hope It's a damn sight better than Friday the 13th.
Well, that's our catchline. If you thought Friday the 13th was bad, wait for Saturday the 14th. It's a comedy horror film, needless to say. I think horror films have changed, and I think they've changed for the better. And I find myself, despite all my liberal views, starting to agree with the censors on the horror films. I think they are becoming excessively gory.
S.J. Perelman said that the writer in Hollywood was seen as a necessary weevil. What do you think the status of the writer is, and do you encourage new screenplay writers as much as you encourage new directors?
Yes, I put great emphasis upon the screenplay. Having been a writer at one time and having been a director at another, or both simultaneously for a little while, I put a lot of emphasis upon the director and almost more on the writer. I don't know of any director who is so good that he can take a bad script and make a good picture out of it.
What are your predictions for the future as regards the structure of the industry, the big studios, your company, and so forth? And will the video, the new age of home video, will that affect the kind of films that we're going to be seeing coming out?
Well, in the short run, I think that you're going to be seeing some changes in the management of many major studios. The average cost of the major studio picture in 1980 was $8.5 million. And in 81, it's being pretty generally accepted that the average cost will be over $10 million. When you add to that the normal cost of distribution and advertising, marketing in general, you're getting figures that are so high, I believe the majority of major studio pictures that will be released in 1981 will fail. I'll make that prediction automatically. The majority of films coming out from major studios in 81 will be failures. At the end of 81, there will be some changes in the management of many of the major studios. That prediction I would make. As to home video and so forth, the second part of the question, it's clearly an expanding area. A lot of money will be coming in through pay television, discs, cassettes, and so forth. I'm not certain how big it will be.
Battle Beyond the Stars looks like about 7 times the budget it actually cost. How did you do so many of the effects that George Lucas did so expensively and make them come out so very well?
All right, first, I think George Lucas is the best in the world in making those effects. He has his own studio, and I created my own small studio and special effects facility in Southern California. He's now in Northern California. And I went with a new group of special effects people. We even had one man who worked on the NASA project, another man from Caltech. We had some physicists working with us, and we spent, for us, a great deal of time and money creating the effects. I think it did turn out very well. It cost, obviously, a great deal less than Star Wars or Empire Strikes Back. On the other hand, special effects are not as good as Star Wars or Empire Strikes Back. But I think we came close. And so our goal was never to equal what George Lucas was doing. We knew in front we could not. Our goal was to come reasonably close to his work. And I think we did do that. And a better comparison for us would be Star Trek or The Black Hole. Our picture, Battle Beyond the Stars, cost about $5 million. And Star Trek and Black Hole both cost over 40, and I much prefer comparing our work to theirs in relation to the budget.
Well, Roger, I think you've probably done quite enough with your sore throat just now. Anyway, next time you come, perhaps you will please bring one of your own films along with you. Meanwhile, we're going to see a clip from Battle Beyond the Stars, the last film that's hit these shores. Thank you very much indeed, Roger. Very good.
16 gamblers to carry my coffin, 6 pretty maidens to sing me and lay the sod o'er me. For I'm a poor cowboy, you know I've done wrong.
This is Space Cowboy, SOS.
Mayday. Help! Can we help him now?
Not without a fight.
You're just lucky I haven't got any ammunition left. I've never taken life before, Nell.
The BARDA says we can take life to save life.
Okay, Nell, let's do it. Manual controls.
Lock in on target. Fire. Fire.
Not from behind.
Step in it, kid. You gotta follow through.
No, not from behind, no.
All right, we're our side.
Fired without me.
It had to be done.
You're placed under my direct command. You fired without me. That which is not organic must not...
Harm that which is. I know. Stand, stupid rule. Jacker to port. Sector 3.
On Saturday on 2, you can see Roger Corman's adaptation of Edgar Allan Poe's classic tale of terror, The Mask of the Red Death. It stars Vincent Price, Hazel Court and Jane Asher, and it begins at 10:15. And at the NFT next week, Peter Ustinov talks to film critic David Castell. That's at 7:50 next Thursday.